Why hello everyone, and welcome to a ghost story with me, Halloween Down. I won't do this voice through the whole thing, so don't worry. Join me by my fireplace, which is also a TV, and we will talk and speak of the spirit world. For what I am about to tell, the tale that I shall tell, is one of the creepiest, spookiest stories in British history. Join me. The ghost story I'm about to tell is one of the most famous ghost stories in British history. In fact, it surrounds a property and a piece of land which to this day is still thought to be the most haunted piece of land anywhere in the UK, and particularly the most haunted house / piece of land in England. This is the story of the ghosts of Borley Rectory, which if you're not from the UK, you've probably never heard of, and if you are not into the paranormal, you've probably never heard of. But this story is probably the original ghost story. It probably is the first real ghost story to ever become truly famous. Borley is a tiny, teeny little village, a hamlet in Essex, in the south of England. And apart from a church and a few houses, there's nothing there, and it would seem that nothing would ever happen there, except that this village is home to one of the spookiest occurrences to have ever happened in British history. So in 1862, the Reverend Harry Dawson Bull comes to Borley and builds a brand new rectory for him and his family, a massive Gothic style mansion, which to be honest looks completely out of place. He builds this rectory for him and his family on top of the foundations of a rectory that stood before but mysteriously burned to the ground. Probably should have given something away. The people who lived in Borley and the surrounding area begged Henry Bull not to build his new rectory on the site of the old rectory because the land was cursed and haunted. But this is the 1800s, it's a time of technological revolution. He wouldn't believe in such superstitions, so he builds his rectory anyway. But almost from the offset, strange things start to occur. The strangest thing was probably something they should have noticed to begin with, which is that the rectory is actually built on top of some tunnels and chambers, vaults under the ground, which had been there for centuries, and nobody really knew why they were there or what they were for. But the rectories had been built on top of this piece of land time and time again. Beforehand, there'd apparently been a manor, and before that, there'd been a Cistercian monastery. And it is this Cistercian monastery that has one of the spookiest and saddest stories connected to it, which then in turn connects to the haunting of Borley Rectory. Soon after the family move into their brand new rectory, they start to experience strange noises and footsteps, and even outside of the house they would hear disembodied screams and footsteps in the grounds that couldn't be explained. These were not the footsteps of animals or the sounds that animals would make. These were human sounds, and it all seemed a little bit too spooky. Eventually, they start to see ghosts. They start to see apparitions. And the most common apparition the family would see was that of a nun. Now you might think, a monastery, why would they see a nun? Well, apparently, according to legend, a monastery of monks had once existed on the site of the rectory and had been destroyed many years before. But it was said that in the 14th century, a monk had met with a nun from a nearby nunnery, and they decided to elope and marry. But this, of course, was a big, frowned upon thing in the 14th century. They were eventually caught, the monk was hung for his crimes, and the nun was walled up inside the walls of the monastery. Quite a despicable act. Later still, after the monastery had gone, a manor house was built on the land. And the man who built the manor house married a nun, strangely. Things had changed a little bit by then. A French nun. But apparently they fell out of love, and as often is the case in these sorts of stories, the husband ended up murdering his wife and burying her body in the basement. So when the family started to see the apparition of a nun, either in the house or walking around the grounds, it tied in with these legends and myths that had been being told now for centuries. And the nun, apparently, her apparition was seen so commonly that the rector himself actually said that a summer house should be built in the grounds so that they could sit in the evening and watch the apparition of the nun walk along a particular path, that she followed the same path every single evening, which later became known by the family as the Nun's Walk. But the nun was not the only spirit seen here. Servants and maids would flee the building in absolute terror, saying that they saw faceless apparitions at the windows. And at times they would even see this supposed nun staring through the window. In fact, it became such a common occurrence that the family would dine in the dining room and watch as a nun stared at them through the window. Chilling, to say the least. Other stories would be that there was a phantom coach that would drive itself down the driveway towards the building at full pelt, and it would disappear just at the moment when it would appear to be crashing into the front of the house. All these strange goings on with the first family that lived in the rectory sort of were just stories that the family kept to themselves. But in 1929, a new reverend and his family, who'd never experienced Borley or its rectory before, came to the village. And for them, the experiences were not something that they could just put up with. The family were terrified by the experiences. They were terrified by the nun, they were terrified by the faceless figures at the windows, and at that point it seems that the stories become a little bit more macabre. There's more of an active presence that's causing disturbances. You hear more about tapping noises and poltergeist activity, things being moved and shifted and thrown around. The wife of the reverend at this point, apparently as well, was cleaning out some cupboards when she found the skull of a young woman in a paper bag hidden at the back of a cupboard. It's thought that this was the skull of the French nun murdered and buried in the basement many centuries before, and that at some point her skull had been found and for some reason kept in a cupboard. But it would probably explain why a nun was so often seen walking the grounds or inside the house, because her body had been disturbed. By 1929, the family had become so perturbed by what was going on in Borley that they alerted the media, and the Daily Mirror sent a journalist and a paranormal investigator down to Borley Rectory to see what was going on and see if anything could be learned from it. And a whole series of articles were written in the Daily Mirror, which then in turn made Borley Rectory one of the most famous ghost sites anywhere in the world. The paranormal investigator Harry Price, who was sent along with the paper, was so intrigued and so mesmerised by what was happening at Borley Rectory that he would eventually end up living in the rectory himself, and he would investigate the rectory for 10 years. In those 10 years, he reported many of the things the families had seen in the past. Very violent paranormal activity, the faceless figures, the ghostly coach, and of course, the nun. He also reported that a mirror, he could talk into the mirror and a ghost would respond by tapping messages back to him. All of this was debunked many years later, as they thought that this Harry Price was the one causing much of the activity in truth. But still, the story remained a terrifying and chilling one. And eventually, in 1939, under mysterious happenings once again, the rectory burned to the ground. Now, no one knows what caused the fire, and no one knows what happened after that. No new rectory was ever built. though there are 2 pictures taken at the time of the rectory after it had burnt to the ground. And both the pictures are truly mesmerising when you notice what they are. These were photos taken by the emergency services after the fire. And in one photo of the rectory itself, you can see what looks just like a burnt down building, and then you notice that there's a brick hovering. A brick hovering in midair, which should not be hovering in midair. That was weird. People who took the photos said as well they felt watched the whole time, and they even saw figures moving through the burnt out rooms and moving at floors that they weren't floors anymore. Taking yet more pictures of around the rectory, the grounds and the graveyard that surrounded the nearby church, they caught as well an image of a phantom moving through the graveyard. To this day, even though there is no rectory there, the church nearby and the whole village of Borley is still considered one of the most haunted places in the world, but definitely the most haunted place in all of England. And the story is one that resonates still with anyone interested in the paranormal, because it's almost like the original ghost story. It's definitely the original most famous ghost story. And with that, yet another chilling ghost story by Halloween Dan comes to an end. I hope you enjoyed this, guys. I know it's slightly different to what I usually do, maybe a little bit more dramatic than usual. I just thought it was something fun. This is something I'm really into. I love the paranormal and I love stories, and I'd love to hear what you thought about this. So please remember to hit that subscribe button, give us a like, give us a comment. I'd love to hear from you. But for now, I'll see you soon. Thanks for watching. Keep it spooky. Bye.